Recording. There we go.
Terrific. Let's pray. Lord, we thank you for this responsibility, the responsibility of providing service and leadership to Northside Community Church. Be with us this evening as we think about the future. Give us insight and inspiration that we may echo to our members your call. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you.
So first of all, I want to say it's hard to get people to think about the future when the present is reasonably comfortable. So I have really appreciated the fact that the board has been open to saying, yes, let's look down the road. Let's realize that some of the economic security we've got at the moment may not always be there. And so let's think ahead a little bit. And what I've done is prepare a slide presentation. Elizabeth and Sue do not have to use superpowers to see it. I delivered print copies of the deck, the slide deck to them. And this is not one of those presentations where you're supposed to sit with your hands folded like you're at the movie theater. I'll put a slide up and I'll explain what it means. And then I'm very happy for us to chat about it, ask questions, or say, yeah, fine, we get that, move on. So if that's okay with everybody, that's how I would proceed. Having said that, Phil and I practiced for me to screen share. Let's see if I can do it twice in a row.
There you go.
But let's see, slideshow.
Ta-da.
All right. So what you're going to see is I'm going to suggest that we have our mind in two places at once. One is a little bit longer term view, a few years to several years from where we are now. And I'm also going to talk tonight about, well, what are some things we need to do right away, quick, moving forward. So that's the two tracks, but let's do this. Reasons to future at this time, reasons to think about the future. We are, nobody needs to tell you, we are in a changing social environment due to, the pandemic, due to what's going on with global politics, due to what's going on with domestic politics. And so we have to be aware of our environment socially. Secondly, we have to be aware of our environment in terms of American Christianity and specifically mainline Protestantism. Fundamentally, no pun intended there, mainline Protestantism has been in decline, numerically at least, for a long time, and that decline continues. It's parallel to the general decline in religious participation. So people now will say, I'm still spiritual, I still believe in God, but I don't actively participate in a religious organization. And that trend is ongoing. It's gone over the last 30 years from 3% of people saying, I have no institutional religion affiliation, to somewhere over 20% now, saying I have no religious institution affiliation. Right now, third bullet, right now we are doing fine, but in part that is due to the incredible generosity of Mary Ellen Hagel, and it may not always be possible for her to be generous in that way. And she will tell you she's not going to live forever. So I think this is a moment when we, operating from relative comfort, need to think ahead about a time when we may not have that cushion. Also, we are taking in this year somewhere probably between 9 and 12 new members. And that is a significant number for us, given the fact that we're pretty small. So that says it's time to think about some things. And then finally, we have this evolving, growing relationship with Gretchen's house. And I think that also provokes us to think about the future. So let me stop there and see if people want to react or add or subtract or object.
I like it so far.
And I was pleased that we have the potential here of 9 to 12 new members in this year of 23.
Yeah, and
I think
we have to
that
confess,
before
these
we-
are not people who have crossed the threshold for the first time in the last 12 months. Some of them are people who started a little while ago,
Right.
and we hadn't, taken time to welcome them into formal membership. But still, it means 9 to 12 new members who have come to us in the last few years. So, and it's clearly been a bit of a group, a new group after the pandemic.
Yes.
Cool.
Okay, I'm going to move on unless somebody tells me not to. So my first conversation, because it was suggested by Nadim, was with Betsy King McDonald. She is an ordained minister. She's worked at some places. The one that we're most likely to know is, if I can remember the name of it, is the Baptist Huron Hills Baptist Church. She was on staff over there for a period of time. And she's now beginning to work on her doctorate in ministry. And Nadim said, she understands what's going on with church organizations much better than I do. I think you should have a conversation with her. One of the things that he thought particularly was that she might be well connected to a group of young adults who are like, well, I see some things about Christianity I like, but I'm not sure, or I came from a Christian background, I'm no longer certain how I feel about it, but some marginally connected young adults who might be looking for something, but they weren't sure what, and it wasn't traditional church. So I did get a hold of her, and over a period of time, we had 2 or 3 contacts, and I was really slow and sluggish in maintaining that contact because there were so many other things kind of going on that were very now oriented. But Betsy's proposal was that she has to do a project for her DMin, and her proposal was that she might take us through a process where we would evaluate who are we, what's meaningful to us, what are our thoughts about the future. So a strategic, what in the old days we might refer to as a strategic planning process, or almost more than that, really, more of a self-awareness process, trying to think about who we are. But as we were having that conversation, other things were going on for her, other things were going on for us, and she ultimately selected a different DMin project. So at the end of our conversations, she very sincerely wished us well, but feels that she has other irons in the fire that she needs to pursue for her DMin program, and that probably her timetable and our timetable don't match. And so she selected something else to do for her DMin, but it was certainly helpful to have a conversation with her. From there, I contacted Susan Beaumont. I don't know if any of you recognize that name or not. Susan is historically an American Baptist, though she currently attends a Presbyterian church in Troy. She was a member for years and years of the Royal Oak Baptist Church, which doesn't exist now. She was with the Alban Institute. Now, the Alban Institute, in my mind, was in its heyday the Protestant consultancy. It was the people, I think they're in Washington, the people you go to when you're looking for consulting help as a Protestant church. So Susan had lots of experience as a consultant there and was very well thought of. When the Alban Institute went out of business, she went into her own independent business. But while she understands the American Protestant church in general. She frankly is more of a specialist in big churches. So she said, Terry, and we chatted, we had a nice conversation. She said, Terry, I think you need to talk to Sarah, and it's pronounced as if it was S-A-R-A-H, Sarah Rice. The reason it's spelled S-A-R-A-I is because that's the Old Testament Hebrew biblical spelling when it comes over into English. Phil will tell us that it's probably, in Hebrew, it's actually spelled Shin Resh. I don't know, what's the last one, Phil?
Sarah.
Het, Aleph? No, I don't know.
No, probably a final hey.
Hey, right, thank you. So this is the English phonetic version of the Hebrew. And Sarah, by contrast, is a small church specialist who has a consulting practice. Her background personally is with the United Presbyterian Church. And you know, the Presbyterians are a little different from us, but not that different. And Sarah's consulting practice has been across denominations. It hasn't simply been to Presbyterians. However, well, I'll say more about Sarah in a minute. While she was talking, however, Susan made some specific recommendations to us. She said, don't get mired into a big strategic planning process. She said she doesn't recommend those anymore. She said, the problem is sometimes you get into these big, long processes that take you so long that things have changed by the time you finish the strategic planning process. So she said, I think it's enough to answer these questions. Who are we? Who do we serve? What do we stand for? And what's 1, 2, or 3 things that are priorities for us going forward? She said, I think that's enough. I said, okay, thank you very much. And then I picked up well, actually, I guess I did it by email. Then I contacted Sarah Rice. Delightful person. Trained at her training was at the Yale Divinity School, which is a just outstanding place. She was ordained within the Presbyterian tradition, and she has served as a seminary faculty member and as a denominational administrator. I think for a while she was kind of the go-to person for the Presbyterians to be the interim, like what we would call our state executive. She would go be in charge of a region in the Presbyterian Church while they were searching for somebody permanent. Subsequently, she's become a consultant, and she's an expert in small mainline Protestant churches. That's us. As I talked to her, it seemed very clear to me that she understands what's happening with small mainline churches, and she takes a very positive approach. So I will make a contrast for you with apologies to John Landis, but I know that while I was gone, John came in and talked about the idea of being let's see, what was the
Hospice.
a hospice church. And she's kind of like, yeah, I don't believe in that stuff. She said, for me, a church is a church. Even if it's in decline, it can do wonderful things until such time as the last person turns out the lights. So she said, I don't care if churches are getting smaller. That doesn't frighten me. That doesn't say something's, you got to stop or whatever. She says she doesn't think that that's necessarily something to say that your ministry is not valid. So I liked her very up-tempo, upbeat kind of approach to thinking about the ministry of small churches, very small churches. And she is either now or recently attended a church where I think she told me the average Sunday attendance was 9.
Wow.
So she understands small church dynamics from firsthand experience. And she says it's a vibrant little congregation. And what she made me think of was when I was in high school, I played organ at an Episcopal church where the average Sunday attendance was 6 to 8. And it was a viable church. So anyway, I'm not saying we want to be smaller and be 6 to 8 members up, but I am saying she doesn't think the validity of ministry or the vibrancy of a group of people is necessarily attached to their size. And I think she's on point about that. Anything you want to ask me about Sarah before I take another step?
I
forward?
like that she's so optimistic.
I really enjoyed talking to her.
It
Uh,
sounds like it.
yeah.
Good.
I also like that she's so optimistic and ready to help us feel confident about not being big. So
Yes.
thank you.
I mean, it's a whole kind of mindset, which I
Yes.
appreciate, because you can ask yourselves, what do we want to be? And what almost always happens is, well, we want to be what we are, but we want to be bigger. Or you can ask yourself, what should our ministry look like right now with who we are at this moment in time?
I love that.
That's more her approach, which is,
Right.
what should our ministry look like right now with who we are? And I don't know, I just came away feeling very positive after a conversation with her.
It sounds healthy.
Yeah,
I
Yeah.
kind of love it because I feel like if you base everything on we're trying to get more people to come, then every time that doesn't happen, we've failed, and it doesn't feel like we're failing. I mean, we have a lot of things going on. We have a lot of stuff on our calendar, and
well, and see, I'm convinced that what draws people is when the church is functioning well and feeling good about itself. I think people pick that up. And I think people also can smell fear when they walk into a church. And if people are overly anxious and like, we're about to go out of business if you don't join us, I think people pick that up. And I think Northside is functioning with confidence at this point and with a positive self-image. And I think that shows in the fact that if you think about who's come to visit us, a high percentage of people who come to visit us come back. So anyway, that's Sarah Rice. And we'll talk more about Sarah in just a minute. So after talking to these three people, my suggestion is that we do two things at once because, in the modern world, we all have to multitask. And the two kind of tracks or processes are simply to be thinking at the same time about long-term things, larger direction setting for the next several years, but to not sort of freeze in place until we get that larger direction setting done, but rather to say, while we're doing our larger direction setting, there are also some short-term things that we need to be doing that will help our health, that will make us stronger and better. And they don't necessarily get in the way of larger changes that we might be planning in the long-term track. So my encouragement here, and I tried this on Susan in that conversation. She said, yeah, I think that's pretty sensible. When we were talking about the, not getting so invested in a long-term process that things are changing around you while you're talking about the future. So this is the basic premise of everything else I'm going to show you in the slides, is to say, what kinds of things do I think are part of our long-term consideration? And what kinds of things do I think are worth being part of our short-term consideration? Long-term, I guess, would be planning for, I'm just going to pick a magic number, don't hold me to this, but planning for 3 to 5 or 3 to 7 years out. The short-term is things I think we can do in the next year to 2 years. So even when I talk about short-term, I don't mean by September 15th, right? In some cases, when I'm talking about short-term, yeah, it might make sense to do it right away, quick. In other cases, it's going to be like, no, we got 2 or 3 other things we need to do before we get to that. So I would say long-term is 3+ years. Short-term is 1 to 2, roughly speaking. So does that division of labor kind of make sense for the moment?
It makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense to me. I appreciate the looking out but not planning so much that everything changes by the time you get to your plan. I really appreciate that. And
Yeah,
the
that
short
was-
term
That was
makes
Susan Beaumont. That was Susan's
Yeah.
insight. Yeah.
it's great. Thank you.
Makes sense to me too.
So let me talk about the long-term first. Because one piece of feedback, Dennis isn't here, but Dennis has seen an earlier version of this slide deck where I talked about short-term first, and he was like, I'd talk about long-term first, kind of look at the bigger picture and then come back and look at the details. And I think that makes sense. So that's what we're going to do. The 4 steps that I can imagine, they don't necessarily have to be done completely 1, 2, 3, 4 in that order. But the 4 steps that I think might make sense in a long-term planning process or a long-term kind of thinking beyond 3 years or 3 years and beyond is, first of all, to go ahead and say to the congregation, we're thinking about the future. And we want to hear your thoughts, particularly about how you see who we are. Well, Susan's 3 questions. So let me move on to that. So the first thing would be, as part of this long-term process, answer Susan's 3 questions. Who are we? Who do we serve? What do we stand for? And I don't see any reason why we can't start on that soon. And in fact, I'd be happy to preach that the sermon that kicks that off this summer or on Rally Day, if it makes more sense to time it to Rally Day. But I think there's no reason we can't start talking amongst ourselves as a congregation. And part of what I think is really important is that we engage some of the newer people in this conversation. I think it'll be fun to see, how do they perceive us? What do they think it is that they're getting into? You know?
Yes, yes.
Why do
Great
they find us? Yeah, why do they find us attractive? What is it they want to be part of? And I'm going to suggest, per my bullet points here, that we have like a small temporary group that, after they've guided us through just this process, that they go out of existence. So it's like, okay, 3 or 4 people who will help us figure out, do we want to do it written? Do we want to do it with little group meetings? Do we want to, to design sort of what for me ought to be, and as much as possible, an easy process, not overly cumbersome, not trying to necessarily deep dive into everything, but to just get a general feel for, how do we see ourselves? What do we think are the outstanding characteristics of this congregation? Who do we think we're serving? Who is our constituency? And that may tell us some things about either what we think we're missing as in a constituency, or what we think we ought to emphasize, or whatever. And what do we stand for? What are the key values we want to be associated with? We've done some of that, because some of that shows up on our website. But again, I don't think it's a bad idea to have that conversation involving some of our newer people. And you're going to see this evening, a lot of things I'm not trying to specify to the nth detail. So exactly how we would do that process, would it be written? Would it be small groups? Would it be something else? I don't feel a need to decide that tonight. I would just say, let's get a small group of people who are interested, who would guide us through this. And frankly, I don't think this needs to go on for a very long time. I think it's something that once we started it, I'd hope we could bring it to a conclusion within 4 to 6 weeks. I don't think we want to get mired in this.
I think the people that would be involved in this would be feeling good about themselves, sharing their opinions and sharing their feelings.
I hope so.
I think,
Right.
I'm sorry. I think a key part of is that, the 3 or 4 people or whoever, has got to include some new people.
Right.
I agree. And you're going to see one of the themes of what I'm saying here tonight is there's 2 sides to an interesting coin at Northside, which is we have people, many of whom are right here, right now, in this evening, who have given their lifeblood to keep this church going. And so on the one hand, I never, ever, ever, ever want to downplay or demean that. On the other hand, what's happened as a result of that is we have a core of people who have been kind of calling the shots for a while, all good, except we have to be cognizant of the fact that we now have new and in some cases very talented people who have come into the congregation, and we haven't worked them into that partly on purpose, right? We're not trying to scare people the minute they walk in the door and say, here, you're going to be chair of something. But I think some of these people have been here long enough that we don't want to start to look like an oligarchy of, oh, I'm sorry, you're not one of the people who's been here for 20, 30, 40 years, and therefore you can't be part of the decision-making process. I think we want to make sure we open the gates to whatever you want to call it, the decision-making bodies. So, yeah, from the very appointment of this little task force, everything we think about should be to include at least somebody or somebodies who are newer.
Here, here.
I think all of this should be shared with them, what we're doing tonight.
Okay? Okay, absolutely. That's,
So
we'll hear it
Tara-
all out, and then if you think so, that's fine. Gloria?
So I was looking at this from the standpoint of a new member. I don't know how new. And I think I would be confused if I was new and you came to me and asked me who's Northside and who do we serve and who do we stand for. I was thinking if with the new people, you sort of flip the questions a little bit and said, who do you think we are? Or why did they, who, when you came here, who do you think you were serving? And what would you like for us to stand for in a way? I don't know. I'm just thinking that they don't know who they are. I'm new and I'm looking for that to already be obvious or answered in a way, but maybe not. Maybe that's just
Two parts to it, though. Maybe there's those of us who have been there forever, and then those of us who are coming in. So it's kind of, that's a little bit of the two sides of the same coin.
And I think
some of these people would be happy to share some of their life's experiences with us.
And it may be that to get answers to these questions, we ask different questions, that this is the information we're trying to glean, but we don't get it by asking these questions quite so directly. And we ask some different questions. And I will just warn you, Gloria, that when you ask or make insightful statements like this, you are in a sense nominating yourself for the task force.
well, I would be quiet for the rest of the meeting.
No. All right. We'll give you a pass if you don't want to be on the task force. Keep making the insightful comments. But that's a really good point, is to think about how do we frame questions and a process. So for example, and I don't know the answer to this. This is why I'm looking to the task force. It might make sense to talk to new members with other new members or not. I don't know. I'm a little concerned that maybe if we were to mix them in some way, that they might get overpowered or overshadowed by people who have had a chance to think about these things more. I don't know, but I think we want to be very thoughtful about how do we invite invitation from new people and from other people. How do we do that? Other reactions or thoughts about this?
I'd like to say that with the opportunity that we have with the new people, I think it would be very helpful to simply ask people, when you started coming, what did you think you would find here? What did you hope you would find here? And what
Have you found it yet?
if everything were perfect, how would it be different from from what you've seen so far? And I think we have a unique opportunity there, because the only other way I could think to do this would be to just try to grab as many people at random, dozens, and say to them, is there anything that would get you to go to church? And if there was, what would it be? And you'd have to accept the reality that somewhere around half of those people would say to the first question, no, there is nothing you could ever do to get me to go to church. Now, those people yeah, I mean, you can't always trust what people say because they, they'll say that and it's not absolutely true, but I think with people who have already started coming, that's really good because you've found people who are actually willing. But I think that it still isn't going to cover that I think there are lots of people out there who would like to go to church and just don't feel like there's any right church for them. I'd love to get to those people. I don't I like your idea about don't wait for the grand plan to come together because then you'll take forever before you get anywhere. But as part of a larger plan, I think it would be good to find as many people as possible who would consider going to church and see what it is that stops them. And I think that simultaneously, I mean, you're going to see my rare evangelical streak here. And that is even for those people who say, no, there's nothing that would change my mind. I think we have to ask ourselves, why not? Why would these people not even consider it? Because I think we need to look at ourselves and ask, what could we do to get those people to say, well, I would go, but because I can't imagine why a person, well, I can't imagine it. I was a person who would have never gone to church until I was about 16. And I just never would have considered it. And I wasn't hostile to it. I just didn't think it had any value for me at all. And I didn't end up going until I was 30, 31 years old. So I have a lot of familiarity with that feeling of why, what good is church? What's it for? But I think we need to start closer to home, which is for people who are looking and people who are willing, and especially for the people who have just recently come. So I think it's not too much pressure or too confusing to say to them, what were you expecting to find when you started coming? And what would you like? And they basically those two things, but also a way of saying what's wrong with Northside is to say, and in what way is Northside not like that?
You make me think of a couple things. That's how one of the big Chicago mega churches started, was they went and asked people, what's the thing you like least about church? And then they designed a church that avoided all the things that people told them they didn't like. The other thing you make me think of is Joe Fisher's standard assessment thing is, what are we doing that you'd like to see us do more of? What are we doing that you'd like to see us do less of? What are we not doing that you'd like to see us do? That sort of thing. But we'll
So how
hopefully.
would we go about asking these people these questions?
And see, that's the part that I want to leave to the task force.
Okay.
Let's pull together some smart people, including, and I don't want to, if I throw out a name, I'm not trying to, but for instance, somebody who's been here 2 or 3 years, maybe, would be a possibility as new, but not completely new. Or somebody who is completely new. I mean, one of each. Anyway, I'd like to put together a task force and let them sort of think about smart ways to do the details.
I like that. I agree.
There's Sherry. Hi there.
Hi, I had a little emergency, but I'm here. Sorry.
I'm glad to see you.
Yeah, glad to be here. I like what Gloria said for new people, turning those questions around, well, who do you think we are? Well, what do you think, who do you think Northside is? Who do you think we stand for? I don't know how you said it, Gloria, but was much more.
I think Andy did a good job of.
Well, yeah. And then I was gonna say, I like what Andy said. And that there are people right away that we can reach out to, Andy, and then in the long run, then expand it. you know, but right now to set that up, I like, Terry, that we're having the new people with, you know, a couple of the old people.
Yeah, and maybe, and again, I'm a little nervous about throwing a name out, but maybe a Marcella, because
Mhm.
she's been here a little while, and
Mhm.
or an Andrew, because he hasn't been here very long, maybe one of each, you know, I don't know, but. And the other thing I'll just say is our conversation night's being recorded. So once the task force is going, they can go back and listen to what we said in this meeting, if it's people who aren't here at the moment. And that will help them get their wheels turning about the right way to do things. So our ideas can be easily passed on through this recording. Are we okay for a moment on this? So this would be the first step, would be to kind of stir things up and get people thinking.
I have a
But-
question.
Yeah.
And I'm forgive me if you already said it, but how many meetings would this task force have? 1, 2?
I'm leaving it to them.
Thank
But I'd like to see the process be brief. My guesstimate about that is 4 to 6 weeks from start to finish. And not overly onerous. I don't want people being asked to fill out a 150 item survey. And so it could be written, it could be small groups, it could be, and that's where I want to leave the details to the task force to say, this is how we think it could be implemented, and this is how we feel comfortable to implement it.
And are you going to lead the task force?
It's a great question. That's a great question. I don't know. I think we'd have to think about the pluses and minuses of that. My immediate reaction is that I should not, because there's always the possibility that when the pastor's sitting there, people are going to be anxious about saying things that they think the pastor won't be happy about. So my quick reaction is that I wouldn't be on the task force, but that I would be available to the task force if there was something they wanted from me.
But this task force is pre the work of like talking to new people.
I would like to see the task force pick it up and run with it and say, okay, we're going to do a 3-item survey and we're going to distribute it and get it back and summarize it. Or we're going to hold every Sunday for the next 4 Sundays, we're going to hold a little discussion group after church and divide people up, and you come one of those 4 Sundays and talk to us, or whatever. But I would love to see the task force.
So the task force is actually going to do the work of gathering this information of
I'd like to see them do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I had one quick thing just to offer, which is thinking about what Gloria said, and also Andy, that the task force, the people on it, I think they should be able to have some opinion of what those 4 people, of what they think the church is also. So it's not completely open without a platform upon which we're already standing, if that makes sense.
Good thought, Catherine.
Good.
Yeah, often the way you frame the questions sort of builds in some presuppositions.
Mhm.
That makes sense.
Okay, I'm gonna take a step forward. So I think that will be important, but what I worry about, as I said at the very beginning, is that if we only talk amongst ourselves, what's likely to happen is we will get a picture of who we are and assume that going forward, we just want to be what we already are. So I thought that might, after the first step, but I haven't asked her this exactly, but I think that after the first step of gathering that information, it would be time to go back to Sarah Rice and say, here's the input we've gotten. We're curious to get your reaction to it. And at the same time, we might have a meeting with her, like the meeting we're having now, where she would talk a little bit about what are the current realities of mainline Protestantism and give us an update on that. You know, we all know about it's sliding down the hill, but she knows more than that. And I think it would be interesting at that point to hear her talk about what she has seen in terms of successful small church models and successful small church ministries. Why is that group of 9 on Sunday morning so vibrant? What's going on with them or other cases she wants to tell us about that may help us think about things we haven't thought about before? Now I'm going to take another one because I think that these two kind of go together. And then sort of with that, I would reach out to other people besides Sarah who may know things about currently successful small congregations. So, for example, in addition to Sarah, I think it'd be good to go back to Brian Johnson and say, who do you know about that we ought to see, other small churches that we ought to see what they're doing? Interestingly, it was Susan Beaumont who said to me, you've got to go investigate what's going on in First Kalamazoo. Not because we need to copy it, but because there are some things in the way that their wheels turned over there and things that they thought about that are a little similar to us and yet different from us. So there's been a whole interesting thing that's gone on over at First Kalamazoo. Who else does Brian Johnson know about in our own denomination that we ought to see what they've done and how they've done it? There are some models that have been around for a while that I'd like us to find out the updates on. There's something called the house church model. What's going on with the house church model? What's going on with the family cluster model? And as we see how those things are being done now and whether or not they're still successful, what do we learn from that? Not how do we copy it, but is there something about that that we go, oh, we'd like to take that piece, or there's an idea that we can't do the way they do it, we would do it differently, but there's an idea worth implementing. There's something called the fresh expressions model. It's not us, but I think if we hear more about the fresh expressions model, again, it may make us say, oh, there's a piece of something that we could implement in our own ways. So for me, the big second step is we bring Sarah in, but also we reach out to other people. And our key question in this is, what's going on out there that we can learn from? Maybe we could learn from big churches, but I got to be honest with you. I think it's going to be a lot faster for us to learn from other successful small churches. And interesting, there may be some things that other small churches could learn from us, but for right now, let's find out who's out there doing what successfully and see what ideas they trigger without feeling like we have to replicate what somebody else is doing.
So Terry, how will we define a successful small church? Because
Great.
I'm thinking about there may be some people who consider Northside to be a successful small church.
I know there are,
Yeah.
because they tell us so.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a precise answer to your question, Gloria, but and it may be that they're only successful in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
It may be that there's something that they're doing particularly well, even if not everything is going well in that church.
Mm-hmm.
So what I'm after is things where it seems like something that they're doing is working well for them, well enough that we at least want to hear about it.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I'm not trying to create some metric of this is what success is and this is what we have to do to be successful. It's more what's functional, because I think maybe functional is even a better, I don't know, but I think a lot of churches at this point are feeling dysfunctional, and I don't feel a need to, I mean, we could do it that way too. We could go out and explore what's causing dysfunction and how do we do the opposite of dysfunction. But I think I would rather go and say, what churches are happy about what they're doing and feel like they're ministering and that they're preaching the gospel and they're happy to share it with us, and what can we learn from it?
I'd like to offer that I think that a successful church is when you ask the people who go, what do you want from church and how well is church giving you that?
Mhm.
I mean, it's stepping back pretty far, but I don't think many people think about what they want from church. And if they did, then the question would be, well, how much of that, what is the church that you go to? What's the grade? What is it getting an A, a B, a C? That's a little different from what do you want from God? Because we're not going to give people what they want from God. We're going to give them what they want from church.
I think that this is a really, I hadn't thought about it until Gloria said, how will we know? But I mean, I do think that Northside is, I mean, I think part of what we're looking at is how to move into the future. But, we've got a lot of stuff where we reach out to the community and it doesn't necessarily result in them coming in on Sunday morning. But I don't think that means, like how we measure what is successful. And maybe it's, and part of this maybe is looking at those things too, because we have people who are avowed atheists who are very committed to coming to some of the things that we've got going on. And I think that outreach is outreach. I mean, they're not ending up in church Sunday morning. So does that mean that we fail? And they're not listening to I feel pretty confident that they're not listening to our service on Facebook either, but still, we're still providing a service and we're still do some very valuable things for the community, I think. I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to say, but I think that it's not all, it's not linear.
Yeah.
Well,
and
church
your
is
point-
people, and people come to our church for different reasons. And as you said, yes, some of them are atheists, and they will say that they are, but they like coming to our church enough to be there and on a regular basis for some of the things. And we should be happy about that. That's good for our church and good for us to be respectful of whoever comes into our church for whatever reason.
And I just want to follow up on something Ann said. Part of this process of looking at other congregations may be affirming of some of what we're already doing. So for example, I'll just tell you 2 sentences about First Baptist Kalamazoo. One of the things they decided to do was to take their building and turn it into a space that could be occupied by social service agencies in the community. And so their church is now a center of agencies serving people who need help in one way, shape, or form. And they've literally formed like an organization with these other groups. So they are like way, way into community involvement. I'm not sure whether or not that has put the congregation on better footing than it was before in terms of their own numbers. But they made a decision that this is what we're about. And so we might look at that and go, yeah, we're trying to do that. And in fact, after we see what First Kalamazoo is doing, we want to do a little bit more of it. Or we might look at it and go, those people are amazing. But that's further down that particular road than we want to go. We want to keep in mind the community outreach. Maybe we want to do some more of this, that, or the other thing. So that's a really good example, Anne, of that the business about involvement in the community is looking at somebody else where that's become their focus of ministry. And seeing what does it teach us. We don't have to copy First Kalamazoo, but what thoughts does it stimulate? What does it affirm about what we're already doing? So that's kind of what this process would be like, is just seeing other things that we don't already know about that are being done by other people who are happy about what they're doing.
Carrie, I just wanted to because some people don't know, I just want to affirm what Ann said. My book, I'm sorry, well, I'm gonna call it a book club, but the group I do Mondays, the Bible study, two of those people do not have any affiliation with churches, you know, but they heard about you, well, they know me, and they asked, can I join? And, you know, they told me, both of them, separate times, you know, that really connected me. I feel like I'm part of something. They haven't, well, one of them comes to our special programs, you know, but the other one hasn't stepped foot in the church. But obviously that's a ministry. The other group that I facilitate on Wednesdays is a group of people who have mental health challenges. Now, these people don't come to our church, but I've had them say, this is such a safe place. How can this feel so safe? I'm just, you know, stunned. So I'm telling everybody this because, you know, there is some of this going on at Northside, and we all know that, but I wanted to share those two things.
Yeah, and some of what may come out of this process, it was saying, okay, here's an emphasis that we're doing some of, but we're inspired now to do more of it. So maybe we decide one of our key ministries is going to be serving as a threshold for people who are outside of Christianity, and we become the threshold where they cross over into some kind of, you know, they don't necessarily get baptized and become members, but we become some kind of a threshold for people who need the church to engage the church. Maybe that'll come out of it, or maybe not. But that's what I'm hoping. Those are the kinds of things I'm hoping that looking at other people and what they're doing would stimulate us to think about ourselves.
And I misspoke, actually in the group that I facilitate, there might be members of our church there, and that's all I can say,
But not all.
but not all. Yeah,
You're serving as a threshold or a contact point for some
exactly,
members of that group.
exactly.
Okay. So
I
yeah.
just wanted to say that I also think certainly not just the music or even the Saturday Slam or Concert for a Cause, but now I feel like our ecosystem is so wonderfully diverse. That includes Gretchen's, that includes St. Mary's, that includes Reverend Davis's church, that includes the recitals, it includes then the things that we offer that some avowed atheists come to with great, almost religious fervor because they want to be there. And so I have been, and as I expressed to you and Dennis, I've been feeling very confident, which is a word you used to describe Northside recently, that what we are doing and what we are offering and the ecosystem that makes up our existence is healthy and diverse. That's what I feel. Thanks.
I agree with you. And it could be, and by the way, whoever it was that said a few minutes ago, other people might consider Northside successful. I think absolutely, for a number of reasons. But it could be that we go through this process and we end up saying, we simply want to extend into the future what we're doing already, or we want to take these three things that we're already doing and deepen them. But I feel as though we'll be able, again, to use the word confidence, I feel as though we'll be able to say that kind of thing with more confidence after we've kind of looked around a little bit and just gotten some input, just kind of check to see what's out there. And so what I would do after these kinds of inputs would be then we set up some way in which we discuss, we decide, and we implement. So another way to say that is, based on our sense of identity and challenged by new ideas for ministry in a changing environment, we would decide, how do we feel called to move into the future? And I would be stunned if that is somehow chopped off from our current identity, like, oh, we're going to do a 180-degree turn. No, no, no. I think it will be, how do we grow from where we are already? How do we grow out of the roots that we've already planted to develop even further being the vine, to use Jesus' image. So that's kind of what I'm up to in terms of recommending long-term stuff. The first step is to really talk amongst ourselves a little bit to understand how we feel and who we are, both old members and new. Secondly, to get some exposure to the rest of the small Protestant church world to see if there are any ideas that stimulate new thinking or confirm existing thinking. And then thirdly, to kind of draw that together into a sense of moving forward. That would be the long term. I'm going to stop for a minute before I jump into short term, see if anybody wants to react further to this concept of a long term, an exploration of the long term. I don't want it to be a long term exploration. I want it to be a fairly efficient exploration that helps us think about the long term.
I feel like this could be a really valuable clarification process for us to, decide where to marshal our resources, because one of the things about being small is that you got to figure out, we can't do everything. And, we don't have 8 committees with 5 people on each of them, because we'd have to include each of the Robakiewicz kids as chairs of committees or something like that. But so figuring out how to best use our resources. And I think that we have an idea about some of this, but I think it's an excellent idea to find out what other people are doing and to get some outside input and some input from people at our church that we don't have, because we really, this group, we've figured out, Terry has figured out, we kind of, it's been the same group for years, way too many years.
And again, I want to say this, we should never, ever be apologetic about those people who have done everything. We just want to make sure that we open the gate to new people. And frankly, I consider it to be a gift from God that these new people have showed up. These are some really terrific people, these are some really wonderful folks who have started to come worship with us. And so I absolutely consider it to be a gift that we want to take good care of.
Yeah.
And they might be wanting to help and go through this little journey with us too. Because if we haven't asked any questions, why, what's the sense?
Yeah, there are some hints that I have that people are eager and ready. So I said to Jody Reynolds, for example, okay, I don't want to be too soon into your grief about this, but you are a talented person. You've got good experience and background. I don't know if you all know, but she's an administrator for the Institute for Social Research. Would you feel like in the near future you could become more involved in things? And she said yes. I spoke to Martin Hooker, and I said, I'm not sure exactly what your areas of interest are beyond. You're clearly concerned for outreach and children and so forth. Are you willing to talk about possible things? And he said yes. He said, I'm not sure which areas, but I absolutely am willing to talk about that. So I have hints from people that they're ready to step up now. And those are not new people exactly. Those are the people who've been here a little while. Marcella has made some indication that she's willing to do more. I haven't broached it quite as much with the brand new people, but anyway, so I think there's great potential there. I'm going to show you a list of names in a minute.
Sounds good.
Is it all right if I talk for a minute a few minutes about short term? I hope so. So here are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things that I think we should do in the short term. And let me name them first, and then we'll take a couple minutes to talk about each of them. First of all, it's time to create the endowment fund. I don't think that's a shocking piece of news to anybody, but I think
Not
it's-
on this board.
yeah, right. It's time to do that. Secondly, I would like us to start planning for a balanced budget in 25 and beyond. And by balanced budget, I mean balanced without the contribution that Mary Ellen is currently making to the operating budget. So that's another way of saying if Mary Ellen were to stop contributing by choice or not by choice between now and 2025, would we be prepared for that? So that's the next short-term thing, because I think we have to start thinking about that now. I don't think we wait until 2025 to do a balanced budget for 2025. This also implies that we may not have a balanced budget for 2024, that we may need to step into this. Third thing I'd like to see us talk about is refitting staffing to current and immediate needs. So there may be, let's say, for example, let me take let's say that we just said, we are going to be a church that functions as a threshold church that really reaches out to people who are not involved in church. And I'm using this as an example, but this is not on my agenda. I'm just using an example because it came up. We might say, you know, we think we need somebody as a part-time staff person, or we need one of our staff people to have some commitment to identifying where are those people, how do we reach out to them, blah, blah, blah. That's not what I'm talking about here. There might be staffing changes that come as a consequence of our longer term stuff, but there are some things I think we need to do currently with staffing. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then the last two things, I will tell you, because Dennis will probably hear this recording, I will tell you anyway. Dennis didn't find these things as exciting, but the last two things are about looking at term limits for the advisory board and getting new people into the advisory board and reactivating some of our committees that have ended up defaulting to a single person, and how we would do that. So I want to talk in a minute about how we would do those things. But if I may, let me take you through these bullet points one at a time, a few minutes each. I don't think I need to say too much about short-term and the issue of the endowment fund, because that's really a finance committee issue. But essentially, my recommendation to the finance committee is going to be, let's start with $100,000. Let's have the finance committee bring that forward to the board, then have the board bring it forward to the congregation, and then go work with Thrivent Financial in Livonia to make it happen. Nothing really dramatic or radical here from things we've already been talking about, but I thought I should put it in here as a action step. This becomes a place where people can help with the future of the church if they choose to, either by making cash donations now or by leaving us money in their wills. With even just 100,000, Sue, you'll know the answer to this better than me. What return might we expect on $100,000?
That's really kind of hard to, depends on where it is. It's
The market's going to dictate that probably more,
It-
right?
Right.
Our stuff is so, it depends on if it's like in the bond situation, it isn't even 4%.
Mm-hmm.
So
So I'm
if
just-
you're if you're like in the Apple mode, you're doing very well. Those
Right.
are risky stocks. But anyway,
So I'm just going to pick a number. I'm just going to say, and I think this is a conservative number, but I'm going to say, if we had $100,000 endowment fund, we would probably get a return of $5,000 a year.
Mm-hmm.
If people give more money over time, and I know that there will be some who will, and if we have funds that come in for other reasons, we could begin to have a predictable chunk of cash, not the whole budget by any means, but we'd be able to predict and say, we know that we're going to at least have available to us if we, keep some money in to keep it growing and blah, blah, blah. We'll have a predictable amount of money to fund certain things in our budget that we may want to commit to for a period of time. So the endowment fund becomes a way of having at least some part of our budget be predictable. And it's a way for people like Mary Ellen. Mary Ellen has said, I want to do something for the church after I'm gone. And this is a way for her to do that and for others to do that. So unless anybody wants to talk about this more, my thing here is just to turn this over to the finance committee and salute them and tell them to have at it.
I think
Andy,
that's great.
Andy, did you have you had your hand up for a minute there? No?
No, I'll save it for finance. Thank you.
Balancing the budget for 25, that's not the next budget. The 24 budget, I don't expect is going to be balanced without Mary Ellen's money. But I think we need to do things like start looking at the feasibility of what are we doing with our total staffing costs? Are there places where that staffing cost might be brought down? That may tie into the second bullet. For example, if we're increasing our relationship with Gretchen's House, is there some way in which over time, I want to be very careful here that I don't say we're getting rid of Paul. We're not getting rid of Paul. But if at some point Paul wasn't wanting to be the janitor anymore, is there something we could do in relationship to Gretchen's House in terms of maintenance of the building, cleaning of the building, that would be less expensive than having our own person to do it? Maybe not. But these are things that I think it's time to start asking ourselves and exploring feasibility. So this is like just looking at possibilities for the next year or so. Not trying to get the budget balanced this year, but saying, where might we be able to reduce staffing or share staffing with Gretchen's House? What other kinds of increased relationship might we have with Gretchen's House? And I'm not telling you anything I haven't said before, but the biggie there that I think we could either ask people, is this desirable? We could ask them that first, or is it feasible? And the question I would want to ask is it desirable or is it feasible to actually let Gretchen's House buy in to part ownership in the building, to create a condominium where we own the upstairs and they own the downstairs? Is that feasible? Is it desirable? And I would ask the feasible question first, because that the desirable question is going to be a gut-wrenching discussion. And if it's not feasible, we don't need to have that discussion. So part of me says, let's find out in terms of tax issues and other kinds of issues. Is this feasible? As most of you probably know, Gretchen's House already does this with one of its other buildings, where they own half the building and another organization owns half the building. They've been doing it very successfully for years. Doesn't mean it's a good idea for us, but I think it's time for us to at least look at the feasibility of that. And then if we decided yes, it's actually quite feasible, it could be easily done, then we can explore the desirability of it, which is the tougher question. And I think we should look at the feasibility of, are there other ways to bring in income in a feasible fashion, other than the ways that we're doing it now? So if I said to Ann, I know what we'll do, Ann, we'll quadruple the number of recitals that we do every year to raise more money. I think Ann would tell me that's not feasible.
I don't know that it's desirable.
Yeah.
But snow plowing was one of the things that immediately came to mind, that, if they owned part of the building because that's something that it appears there's not a lot unless we go back to those of us that were doing stuff, that we can't, it appears that we really can't reduce that on our own. And that's more than we pay some people, that's $9,000 or $10,000 a year. It's more than we pay most
Also,
people.
anything with our grounds, and the mowing and what have you. I mean,
Although the
that's
mowing
something that-
isn't near, yeah, absolutely, but the mowing isn't
Right.
nearly as expensive as the snow.
And I think the snow's a great example, and I would be I personally would be delicate about this, but I have to tell you, I'm not sure that we would divide the snow plowing with Gretchen's 50-50. Because the truth is, we don't need it plowed 7 days a
That's
week.
right.
They
Very
need
true.
it plowed 5 days a week. And so there might be a negotiation on some of these items. If indeed, yeah, so we'll just leave it at that. There's an example of the kind of thing I'm thinking about where some way or another, we may be able to interact with Gretchen's house. And so far, they've been very open to considering things like that and going, yeah, you're right. We're willing to think about that. So I don't think it's time to necessarily make decisions about all of this yet, but I'd like to have done the feasibility so we know what's really an option to explore and what's not an option to explore. If it turns out that if we were to do any serious kind of more serious building sharing with Gretchen's, that we're putting ourselves at risk of becoming a tax-paying organization, that probably is going to end that discussion. I don't think that's the case, by the way. I feel, well, I don't think it's the case, but I think we need to find out about the feasibility of some of these things. And I think it's time to start doing that. Other things people would like to comment about with this slide? Staff, refit staff to our current needs. Here are some of the things that I want us to explore. Again, some of them I think are going to come more naturally, some of them less, perhaps. I don't know. First of all, I think it's time to move Sherry Get Combe Clark to co-pastor because I think she's already functioning that way. In business, we do this a lot. In business, we're like, oh, we're giving you this project. That was what they did to me twice. You're going to be a project manager. And the project I was managing was going to be what I was going to do next. And then finally, after I'd done it for a year, they said, oh, now we're going to give you the title. So we're kind of being corporate with this. But I think it's time soon, sometime soon, to make Sherry the co-pastor. Probably at that point, it makes sense for her to yield on the bell choir director position. And I'd like us to at least explore the possibility of just making Paul the director of both. I believe that we would probably be able to have a conversation with Paul where 1 + 1 might equal less than 2. In other words, where his directing both choirs might not be exactly the same amount of money as the two of them separately, but I'm not sure about that. And I'm not, yeah. I think that needs to be explored. So what do we do about the director of choirs? And then we've been doing some discussing with Catherine and with Dennis about maybe it's time to take the music positions and divide them differently than they're currently divided. Right now, we have a director of music, we have the 2 bell choir directors, and then we have a musician in residence. And we also have the cellist in residence, which really doesn't come up here, but maybe it's time to look at a position division where we have somebody who does what I would call the hardcore accompanying, the things specifically related to sitting with the choir at the piano and playing the hymns on Sunday. And then Catherine becomes more involved in all the things where music is doing something other than simply the worship service. Things like working with the kids for music, things like reaching out to the School of Music, all of our kinds of external and some of our internal engagements with music that are not the express content of the worship service. And again, we don't need to decide any of that tonight. I'm just saying this is part of what I'd like us to start thinking about sooner rather than later. Reactions from anybody and everybody.
Well, as we discussed in the meeting, I'm ready for that, Terry. You and I, Dennis, yeah. For what it's worth, I just wanted to
Yep,
put that out.
yep,
Yeah.
Yep. And again, there may have to be some discussions and a lot of discussions, and we may back up and say, this isn't the right way to go with some of these things.
Yeah.
But this is what I'm putting out there as a like, okay, this is my running it up the flagpole to see who salutes.
Yeah.
And nobody's being asked to salute tonight.
You just have to digest it all.
Absolutely. And it has to be taken through proper processes. So it's like, okay, this is what Terry's putting out there. Now what's going to happen is we're going to start parsing out who should talk about this in more detail. Who should have, and Andy, I don't quite know how this goes, but when we get to a co-pastor position, I'm pretty sure that has to be called by the congregation. I think it also doesn't, if we were to make Paul director of choirs, I don't think that has to go to the congregation. So there's some sorting out that we have to do with process about who makes these appointments ultimately. To what degree does the congregation make them? To what degree are they made by other places, other people? And it's just informing the congregation. I'm not sure of all that. Okay. Now the part that is really bureaucratic, I'm going to take just a couple minutes to do this. It's fun when you go back and look at the bylaws, because it's like, oh, we have developed a lot of practices that are not specified in the bylaws. In some cases, they're not contradictory to the bylaws. They're just not specified in the bylaws. And I stumbled across a couple things in the bylaws that are specified that I'm like, we don't do that anymore. But here we go. The bylaws divides us who are in this meeting tonight up into two groups. First of all, there are non-officer board members who serve 3-year terms and then leave the board for at least 1 year, according to the bylaws. The officers, you'll see in a minute who the officers are. The non-officers are listed at the bottom. Bailey, Carter, Dawes, Lazar, Goodson, Hagel, Perry, Worcester.
Both Dawes Lazars?
No, the other Dawes, P. Dawes Lazar, I'm sorry, that should be A. Dawes Lazar.
Okay,
P. Dawes Lazar is on the next list.
okay.
But you all know that we haven't been holding people to 3-year terms with a year off. We have basically sentenced them to life terms without probation. So I'm going to recommend, and again, we don't have to decide any of this tonight. I'm just throwing it out there. First thing, I'm going to recommend we go back to having 3-year terms and that people go off for at least a year. And maybe we'd have a thing where you could do a second term and then go off, but that we actually go back to limiting our terms in some way. So what I would love to see us do is stagger the departures of the current people over a 2 or 3 year period. Replace those people, bring on as the older people go off, bring on, I don't mean age older, you know what I mean, people longer tenured. As the longer tenured people go off, replace them with newer church members and or those not currently serving. So not currently serving, but here for a long time would be, is it time to ask, I know there's a history here, but is it time to ask Stephanie to consider something again now that they're more involved because of their daughter? Is it time to ask other people who've been around for a while? Is it time to ask some of the newer people? Is it time for a Marcella to consider? I don't know. But you bring on some newer people to replace the currently departing people. This doesn't mean that when you go off the board, you go away forever. It means you take at least a year off and catch your breath. And I would ask all of the people leaving the board to stay on a committee. Pick a committee if you're not already on one. So for example, with Ann, well, she's already on one. So I would say to Ann, if you're going to go off the board for a year, please don't leave fellowship at the same time. Same thing with Dennis. I would say to Dennis, when you go off the board, you do not necessarily need to leave music and worship. And you may not realize this. Part of your job currently as the chair of the board is to appoint the chairs of the committees.
Wow.
Wow, I don't know how we've been doing that, but anyway, it was a revelation. All right, so that's what I'd say about the non-officer board members. Then there are the officers, and the bylaws say that the officers serve your one-year terms, but may replace themselves, and it doesn't say for how long. So we've had some people been replacing themselves, like for half a century. Those are at the bottom. The officers are the treasurer, and I've added the assistant treasurer, the financial secretary, there's the other Dawes Lazar, the clerk. We don't have, I don't think, a current historian. And the chair of Christian education is considered to be an officer. I have no idea where that came from, but there must have been something going on once upon a time where they wanted the chair of Christian education not to be just a chair of a committee like other people, but they wanted him to actually be an officer. So my recommendation is, once again, stagger the departures of our current officers, have our current officers, before they go, spend some time, maybe at least a year, with understudies, people that we're trying to work into these roles. So I'm not suggesting anybody go running out the door right now, but I think it's time to start thinking about how do we start to replace ourselves. And again, after we've replaced ourselves, we don't run away. We stay on committees. We come back on the board, but we take a little breather from some things and create a little space for new people. And again, as I said, I would ask all the departing members to accept committee positions.
Can we grandfather some of this?
You can't run out the door tonight.
Well, no, I
Oh.
mean, I've been saying, like, I've been the financial secretary for 6 years. So if it's only supposed to be for 1 year and I've been there for 6 years, so I should get 6 years off.
No, not necessarily.
Probably not.
There's a thought. Okay.
Yeah. And well, there's also the possibility of doing co-positions, but my general thing here is to start suggesting that we look at ways. Basically, what we've done for the last few years is say, okay, the people who are on the board will be voted again in January. And I'm saying, I don't think we need to do that. I think we need to be more systematic about trying to get the new people folded into the mix and the newer people. And implied in everything I've just said is, I think it's time to repopulate the committees. I think it's time to activate. We have some committees that are very active. We have some committees that are active, but not with a lot of people on them. And I think in both cases, we can add people. So I'd ask, as I said already, I'd ask all the departing board members and officers to make sure that they're staying on one or more committees. I think a couple of committees ought to be plenty, but whatever. Also ask newer members who are not coming on the board yet to accept committee positions now as a way of warming up. Well, as a way of contributing right away, but also for some of them, that might serve as a less scary way to move toward the board. I've served on this committee. I was on music and worship. That was okay. I'd be willing to take another step to the board next. What are the committees? As far as I know, these are the committees. I might not have them all, but finance, music and worship, mission, building, grounds, Christian education. Oops, fellowship is missing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm going to put this on here and now the whole slide's going to fall apart. And now here's a list at the bottom of some of the people that I think we ought to be either moving toward board membership or moving toward committee membership. And if you count, even if you don't agree with all of them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. There are 13 people named there. Even if only half were activated. That's more than half a dozen. And if you start looking at those names, you go, you know, there's somebody who's got some thoughts and some talent and something to contribute.
I think we all need to get back out the total constitution and all the committees so that we can all get ourselves back into the groove and acquainted with all of that.
I'd be glad to make copies for
our-
everybody. I'd be glad to make
Yes.
copies for everybody. With this caution, we may still decide either to say, well, okay, that's on paper, but we're just gonna, for now, not feel like we have to strictly adhere to that. Example, I don't know that we necessarily need to consider the chair of Christian education an officer of the church. It's there, but we might just kind of not be too worried about that right now. On the other hand, we might say there are some things that are not required by the bylaws that we want to do. For example, we might want to, as a practice, say, we're not going to keep making officers replace themselves for decades. We're going to start having an informal practice of making sure that after a certain number of terms, everybody gets, cycled out for a while. But I would be delighted to make copies of the Constitution and bylaws. I have them now, and I'll give them to everybody so you can see what I saw.
So where does building use fit in there? Because I didn't see it specifically, and I forget what all the things
You know
I
what?
do in terms of.
That's
didn't
another
even
one that
have
I should just list it there, even though it's not part of the what existed before. You are correct. Well, here's where, let me put it in brackets for this reason. We delegated the job of building use to Esther. And the board said, we, the board, are delegating this to you. We trust you. Go for it. You make the decisions. If there's something you got a question about, come back and ask us. When Esther left that position by choice, we then turned to Anne and said, Anne, you're the new Esther. Go for it. And I would say, Anne, if you'd rather have a committee to work with you, we could absolutely do that. But if it's easier and more efficient to just make the decisions, we've given you the authority to do that.
Well, and it could be that it's a little bit of both, but I was just thinking, like, if Catherine is in charge of music, if that position is musical programs and stuff like that, there's a lot of building use involved in that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that should necessarily fall to, so it could be building use with some backup, some backup people. But I can see where if we're focusing, if she's focusing on external programs or, people, then the building use is a little more enhanced. And I'm not saying, that's.
Absolutely. And what we do immediately with that, like what you're talking about, may take a further twist a little way down the road if indeed we say we want to do more outreach or something, then yep. But no, I think you could make it a formal committee, or I think you could just say, I'm going to start an email chain for people who have a stake in this and stay in communication with those people about the requests that are coming in.
Okay. Catherine, I see your hand is up there.
Yes, I just wanted to say I appreciate the direction that everything is taking. Back a few pages, I didn't comment about the position that Terry was suggesting for me because we had that conversation, but I like that direction. I like knowing that the things I've been doing would have a home. I mean, in terms of Saturday Slam and all of those different things. And I think what you just said, Anne, about building use, you would still be the empress of building use, but you would have some support staff, which you have unofficially right now, but it would be perhaps more organized and more formalized. So I support all of that.
There is one more slide, which I forgot about, which is just suggesting. If we go to the bylaws, the pastor's ex officio on the board in all committees. I'm thinking, again, we don't need to change the bylaws, but I think as a practice, we probably could have both pastors on the board ex officio, and then one pastor on each committee. I don't think it has to be like the pastor, but that Sherry and I could each take certain committees to sit with. Just part of what that does is it facilitates communication. Because if we have been with other committees, then we kind of pass things back and forth. And I think Anne, but I think even if Anne were to get off the board for her current, she is currently a non-officer member of the board. If she gave that up, I still think as the administrator, she would have presence on the board ex officio with vote, because I think the administrator needs to come to the board meetings. So I don't think she has to chair the board necessarily, but I think in her role as administrator, she needs to be there and to have a vote. And then Catherine, we haven't had a chance to talk about this. And I don't think I've even talked about it with Dennis, but I think the music directors clearly would be on the music committee ex officio with vote. What I'm not clear about, and we don't have to talk about it tonight, is whether or not all music staff should automatically be on the music committee ex officio with vote. I don't have an opinion, frankly, about that one way or the other. You very well might, and we could certainly talk about that and try to figure it out. But
Okay,
I think these are people who ought to be attached to committees for sure with vote. The pastors, the administrator, and the music directors ought to be attached to particular boards and committees with vote. That's just
that makes sense to me. The fellowship has been a very unofficial affiliation, but Thor and I have both been involved with fellowship, and he would like to be involved with the music and worship committee. I know that. Okay.
Yeah, and so there's two ways to get him there. One is that he becomes a regular elected member, and the other is that we decide that all musicians should be their ex officio. So there's two routes to that.
Okay.
So I think my time is up. Oh, my time is over. I'm sorry. I'm past time. This is just for you to all think about, let it sink in. The one question I guess I would ask is, do people have a feeling about when we'd like to kick off, maybe with a sermon or something, the long-term process and the long-term task force? Is it sensible to kick that off in conjunction with Fall and Rally Day?
I was thinking Rally Day sounded like a good point.
I agree.
I think the week after Rally Day.
Very good. So maybe something on Rally Day to point to it and then drive the stake more in the following Sunday.
Yes.
That makes sense.
That's good.
And would it be all right if I sent an email around or sent something around and said to people on the board, do you want to be on the task force, and or do you want to suggest somebody not on the board to be on the task force, and collect sort of nominations for the task force, and then bring that back to the board at its August meeting so we could commission that task force to start in September?
I think that's fine.
Yep, I think it is too.
And Terry, I mean, I know this is all, nothing is written in stone. We were talking about 4 people being on the task force. Will it be
A few at 5.
Yeah, because I was gonna say that when the results come back in, there may be a strong 5, you know.
Right.
That would want to do this, so.
Okay, yeah, I don't have any. I'm hoping that as we look at nominations, it'll become clear that, ooh, here's some people that really need to be in this.
Right.
Thank you all for your participation and attention. I appreciate it very much. And we're sending the slide deck out to everybody. The recording is available. If you want, Ann will figure out how to tell us about that or something.
Yeah, I'll figure out how to get that to people if, Dennis, if he wants to, and Sherry, you were late, so maybe you want, I don't, the first part.
Is this something people like Simeon Sunder could look at, and Thor and?
Oh, so that's a great question. Would you like me to share I'm just only a little nervous about sharing the slide deck without explanation, because I don't want people to misinterpret the shortened bullet
Sure.
points.
Well, I thought about reaching out to Simeon Sunder today saying, you're welcome to come listen to Terry's visioning. And I felt it was a little bit of late notice, and maybe it wasn't my place to issue that or extend that invitation. But
So, being that people are always allowed to visit, can we let people, if they're interested? I mean, this is an hour and 45-minute meeting. People may not really want to, but do we want to make it available for? if people want to?
I'd be okay, particularly if we posted the Zoom to also post the slide deck.
Okay,
I think it would be a great gesture.
so we can just, I mean, I could just put that on the YouTube, the church YouTube
Right.
channel, and make
Okay.
it public. And then put a
Is
link on it, a link
This
to
part
it.
is not being recorded, right? What we're doing now?
No, this part is being recorded.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, I was gonna say this part maybe shouldn't be recorded with all this discussion, but
I don't think there was anything too sensitive in the discussion.
No, and
We didn't call Ann names like we usually do.
well, that's okay. You can call me names as long as I'm
no,
here.
I,
Yeah, I was just, I mean, since these meetings, technically, people can come and be
Yeah,
observers.
no,
and-
I don't think I said anything. Does anything, they may think of anything that we said tonight that was really classified information? I mean, I threw a few names around as examples of things, but
I feel
think
that